You are listening to episode 24 of the EU Startups podcast, today with entrepreneur and investor Michael Brehm, who currently runs i2x, an AI-based solution for real-time conversation coaching. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the EU Startups podcast. We paused this podcast for quite a while to fully focus on the in-person comeback of the EU Startup Summit, and I have to say it was totally worth it. On May 12 and 13, we gathered almost 1,700 founders, startup enthusiasts and investors in beautiful Barcelona, and it was just awesome to meet so many passionate, like-minded and ambitious people from all over Europe in one place. If you missed this year's EU Startup Summit, make sure to join us next time. The 2023 dates will be announced later this month. And now, without further ado, let's jump right into today's interview, which our head of content, Patricia, actually already recorded earlier this year.
So, welcome to the next episode of the EU Startups podcast. Today, we are delighted to be speaking with Michael Brehm. So Michael Brehm is one of the biggest names in the German startup scene, and he's a pretty well-renowned serial founder, manager, and investor. Currently, Michael is focusing on his AI company, i2x, which he founded in 2017. i2x is a really innovative AI-based platform that analyzes phone calls in real time and then provides real-time tips and suggestions in order to generate more meaningful, more successful conversations. So Michael, you've sold companies to the likes of Google. You're a part of a company that turned down an offer from Facebook, Studi Hofstedt, and you've taken one company public, and you've also started an investment company. So I think it's fair to say that you've quite the instinct for business and identifying trends, and you've quite an interesting story to tell. So it's really, really great to have you here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So to start off, can you give us just a little overview of your entrepreneurial story? So how did you find yourself becoming this serial founder and investor?
It actually dates back quite a bit. So already in school, I was fascinated by entrepreneurship. And when I was 15, I actually founded my first company, but very offline, for actually producing some clothing for snowboard accessories like hats and hoodies, because I grew up in the south of Germany, close to the mountains, and everybody in the 19s was starting with snowboarding. So I was always fascinated with like basically having a white paper, think about something, then people say, oh no, this can't be done, this is difficult, and then the process of really creating something is just amazing. And since then, I always wanted to either work in a startup or found one myself, which then after I finished kind of school and university, I did. And what I also now figured is that I think it's really cool in the sense that you're working with very motivated, very smart people. But I also feel working in technology and in startup, it's kind of working on the future. It's like I feel a lot of the things that 10, 20 years ago you could see in movies and thought, oh, this is far away. It's now reality. And for some little parts, you're kind of involved in creating these.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's really true. Like the innovations that we're coming up with today are the future. And as you said, it's really interesting to look back and think of all the things that have been created. And yeah, I didn't realize that you started out with a snowboarding business. That's really cool. So at the minute, which kind of companies, which programs and projects are you working on?
So, I mean, I'm managing director and founder of i2x, where, as you mentioned, we do real-time speech analytics, but most importantly, we give real-time feedback and guidance and support to agents in customer calls. And the reason is that with my last company before that, it was a large daily deals platform, large competitor to Groupon, with close of 10,000 people working there. We had 2,500 telesales agents. And that was a incredible quest to help these 2,500 telesales and customer support agents to do what we wanted them to do, but also for them to reach their full potential. And I figured that that's obviously not so easy to do. And the best suggestion at the time I was getting is like, yeah, you have to hire one trainer per agent and put them next to the agent, and then that will fix it. And I thought, oh, thank you very much. This is unfortunately not possible. Neither will I find 2,500 trainers in 30 countries within a very short amount of time, nor does this make any financial sense. And and then I thought it would be really cool to build a software that does this, because essentially it goes much further than just in support, but it goes to the core of humanity, which is what makes us humans. It's communication. It's next to our brains and our hands as tools, is the ability to communicate and to essentially achieve a common understanding over billions of people about one specific topic, is thanks to communication. And how often have we probably all thought, oh, yesterday we should have said this or shouldn't have said that, and we should have communicated better, more, etc. And we're essentially all not reaching our full potential because of lack of kind of communication abilities. And building a platform and a software that in real time helps you to improve that, I just find this very fascinating. And then if you want to do this, the question is where to start. And then in general, customer support and sales is a good place to start, because you get a lot of consistent and well-structured data. And maybe also like how I like to look at companies nowadays as everything, not only, I mean, obviously it has moved software and now it's moving more in AI. And then the question is what's important for that. You have the amount, normally data is not the problem itself. Computing powers, there are algorithms you can program, all of that. The biggest problem, and that's like where 80 or 90% of the problem is coming from, is about the structure of data. Do you have good data sets? Is it well labeled so that the algorithms can do something with it? And normally that's very rarely the case. So so I like to look at companies basically from a data strategy and data label, data structure backwards. And that has in the past worked well. So you think, what would be the ideal data set to achieve what you want to do? And then from how can you get that, or from which type of customers would you need to have, what type of operations? And then you look everything backwards. And ideally, you do this, you collect the data, you enrich them, etc., and build them, provide already value to revenue on the path. And I think one of the best companies that actually does this is Tesla, in the sense that their end goal obviously is a full autonomous driving software, which is still, as we now know, quite a bit away. But they have a product that provides value that they can sell. But on the go, since the beginning, they're collecting these great data sets and can build on top of this their software.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's really interesting to hear that, and the importance of looking at those data sets then. So i2x as well really is kind of focusing on that collaboration between humans and AI to improve communications. What do you see as the long-term, their vision for i2x?
So it's really to help people to communicate better. And do a better job in what they say, how they say it, when they say it, how they react to people. And we start mainly for medium-sized and large companies in sales and service. And maybe you ask, like, okay, why don't you want to automate it? At least a lot of my friends ask me that. It's much cooler, pure software. And obviously a lot of managers say, oh, so you have a lot less trouble with HR. But I think, I mean, for one, it's easy to automate a one question, one answer, two questions, two answers. Most of the conversations have, let's say, 10 or 15, 20 iterations. And in every single iteration, you have a mistake rate. Let's say it's 10% or 20%. And obviously over several of these iterations, over 10, 20 questions, answers, this adds up. So in the end, if you would want to automate it, at the end, you've maybe just answered 1 or 2 or 3% correctly, which means your customer experience is extremely low or non-existent. And that's why and this, by the way, this kind of topic of adding up the mistake rate and then kind of in total having a very low or bad experience is true for a lot of the kind of projects that try to automate completely. And that's why I'm now a much bigger fan of augmentation than trying to immediately automate everything, which in many, many cases, and again, self-driving vehicles is the best examples, is really far away. But making the human better and helping the human to improve, you can immediately create value. There's a lot of potential in it, and then you build the data sets to do a lot of other things.
So you're helping the human rather than replacing the human.
Correct.
Which kind of keeps more integrity in the conversation. Which is
it's not only keeps more integrity, but it's simple. Like for the mistake rate, it's simply currently technically impossible to automate a lot of these conversations. Sure. And that's, by the way, it's true even for emails where there are systems that kind of make you suggestions what to answer instead of trying to automate everything completely, and in many other areas as well. So in general, I think, by the way, also if you're thinking about AI projects or what to do, I think the best, what I mentioned first, obviously data strategy is important. But second one is, don't immediately think about like, oh, how can I completely automate a big part or everything, but rather, are there systems and are there projects where I can, with technology, help the human to get better? And that's oftentimes the one which you can implement faster, which leads to faster success, and also in organizations more acceptance.
Interesting. Okay. So when you were founding i2x and getting off the ground, what challenges did you face?
Many. I mean, a lot of technical challenges. So we didn't really know if what we wanted to do was possible. So we built a few prototypes. I think that was the biggest one. So when I started i2x, I wanted to focus on a big problem, and I think communication and human interaction is a big problem or topic, and I wanted to kind of work on something with a very complex technology. Before I have built large or was involved in large companies, but not necessarily, they were not necessarily considered deep tech or companies. And I thought I wanted to work on really the cutting edge of technology, kind of great patents and all of that. So that was from the beginning the main challenge. We then what actually sometimes is a challenge, which wasn't so much the question is there a market? So I went to a lot of people I knew, and then after I think probably 1 or 2 months, I had about 50 companies that told me, yeah, in general, I think it's a big problem for us, this whole kind of customer support, etc. And we would be interested in trying out and testing that, which I think is a good strategy. Also, if you're launching a new project or something, instead of first building the project and then selling it, first sell it. Basically, create your sales deck first. Try to sell it. And then when people say, yes, we're interested, you tell them, you know what, there's so much demand. In a year's time, your delivery slot is there, and then you have a year's time to build your first product.
So sell first and make later.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously with a clear intention to build it, but oftentimes, especially with very technical founders or also in units, I see that there is great technology developed, a theoretically great product. But then once it hits the market, they figure, oh, it's not exactly what the market wanted or needed, etc.
Sure. So you need to make sure that there's space there first more and there's interest.
So I think that was one. And then the other one which was a challenge, which I think now we have tackled well, is obviously that to work on voice, there is a lot of very specific regulation in Europe with the GDPR, which is not only that you have to keep the servers in the EU, but that's maybe 1 or 2% of the regulatory framework. But there is a lot of topics you have to be aware of. So that's something we take very serious. We work against a lot. So I would say, technically, from one, is it possible at all? And the second one, from a regulatory perspective, and maybe during the pandemic, one of the things that we saw is that as everything moved remote, and a lot of these call centers are, let's say, in more developing areas of Europe, which not necessarily have the best broadband or internet connection. Obviously, to then get the data, that at the time for some of the people was a challenge to have actually, if they want to work from home, to have a technical setup that this is possible at all. I mean, not only for us, but even like accessing the CRM fast enough, doing the VoIP calls, being able to do this. So for several of our customers and their employees, that was a major challenge.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so many different pieces to the puzzle, the pandemic puzzle, that sometimes we don't think about. So that's an interesting insight. So obviously you are Berlin based. So what do you think that it makes Germany and Berlin, more specifically, a great place to launch startups?
Well, where to start? Let's start, which is quite interesting. Why did Berlin develop into this major hub that it came? I think it's a little bit an untold story. So obviously, everybody knows that after the Second World War, Berlin was divided, and then you had West Berlin, which was essentially, or not essentially, which was surrounded by the Soviets, and everybody was afraid that any minute or any day they would just kind of walk into or conquer West Berlin. So there were a few people and companies that wanted to be there, which led to the result that the German government at the time, I think, paid something like 500 Deutschmarks, maybe it was a little bit less or more, to people for just being there. So if you were just living in Berlin and didn't do anything, you would receive every month a certain payment. Now, the question is, who wanted to live off 500 Deutschmarks at the time? Was worth more than today, so 250 euros, but certainly you wouldn't get rich from it. So it was essentially artists, creative people, etc. And then the wall came down. A lot of East Berliners went to the west or somewhere. So you had essentially, and by the way, also the other thing is that the government then did, because corporations didn't want to go there. You couldn't put important administration like finance ministry, defense ministry, you couldn't put there. So they put a lot of universities and research institutions there. So when the wall came down, East Berlin, let's say, was half empty, and the other half was full with research institutions and creative people. And then, and obviously very cheap labor cost. And if you think about what do you need to create startups, there wasn't an opportunity to work for large corporations. You need essentially good, well-educated people, creative people, and ideally cheap cheap living costs. And that was in a way the perfect seeding ground. And then when the internet hit, etc. And I think that's when how this whole ecosystem grew, because Berlin was this city that everybody thinks, then Berlin suddenly attracted these kind of creative people and became, after the wall came down, this crazy place. But it didn't really. It was like, because of political reasons, it was this crazy place already 30, 40 years before that.
It's fascinating. It was like rooted in its historical DNA in a way.
Yeah. And that's I think that's until today, it kept a lot of this heritage, and it's a great place to visit. I think if you think about hubs, why do certain hubs develop? Berlin is also a place which people really like to visit. So if you think about, and sometimes it's funny, it's like even a lot of international investors, Berlin is definitely the place you want to see. If you want to visit or experience physically the kind of Cold War, the Second World War today, Berlin is the place where you go, which stands for that, where you visit pieces of the old wall, where you have these museums, where you have Checkpoint Charlie and all of that. So it's a place where a lot of people want to go there anyhow. And if you're an investor, if you're interested in startups and you visit it anyhow, then you say, okay, then maybe I also look at one or two startups, and then you invest in one. And then once you have invested in one, then you have to go there to board meetings, and you come to more. So what you see with a lot of the kind of hubs that grew, there are hubs where people liked to go there anyhow. There is a similar story around Munich with Oktoberfest, etc. It's a nice city, so people go there anyhow for many different reasons, or because it's like one of the major hubs to go into when you want to go to the Alps for skiing, and then you meet startups, etc. So I think that's then also obviously you needed capital. By now it has improved really a lot, but that was in the 90s, and also especially in the 2000s, still a major issue, because there were very, very few VCs that were Berlin based or visiting Berlin.
Great, that's really fascinating insights. So thank you very much for that. So going off on that, I mean, obviously AI is a big part of new tech, new up and coming tech, and it's obviously a big part of i2x. How do you see Germany and Europe positioned to lead AI development over the next few years? Do you think that it's going to be the hub for AI?
Well, to lead in general Germany or any other country in Europe, I think that's I mean, obviously would be wishful, but currently I think it's more catch up. It's very obvious that the US and China are leading. By the way, not necessarily in research. So Europe in general, and I would mark this to Europe. Europe is amazing at research and at patents and all of that. But there is a big issue in kind of transferring that into foundations, into companies, into applications. And I think there's, I mean, you need the most concrete thing I would do is improve on the spin out programs, processes of universities to kind of found startups. Every university, I think, should have a standard kind of standard contracts. If you want to take patents and found your own startup, they should have for technical people these entrepreneurial courses, and they should make it in a way that also then you
culture in universities.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Obviously, more investment, but more investment will come if there are exciting projects and companies. And then another big question is what can you do with the data? And obviously, we have a very specific regulatory environment, which sometimes it makes it not very easy for companies to build AI applications, because the essence is data. And if it's very heavily regulated what you can do with data, you're naturally in a disadvantage over places like the US and China. But this is then a very political discussion, which I think just as Europe, we need to have.
Interesting. Okay. So then final question. You've obviously had quite a successful, quite a varied career. Looking back at it all, what would you say has been your proudest moment?
I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was one moment. I think there were two processes which were really great. One was when the first kind of tech startup where I was managing director was a social networking site called StudiVZ, already 50 years back. But when we became the largest and most trafficked website in Germany and had 50% of everybody who had an internet connection in Germany every day on our website, and you just felt that this kind of accelerated the use of the internet and just we essentially brought social media to Germany and actually to a few other European countries.
Facebook, obviously, massive giant, tried to buy you, right?
There are rumors that they wanted to do that. That's
okay.
but I mean, there were a lot of stories around it. But it was really this, like, having, if you're an entrepreneur and oftentimes you start with a white paper and suddenly you see you're a part of this massive transformation. That's something I would say I was proud of. And the other one is actually a platform that I co-founded, which is Redstone.vc, which is a kind of platform that creates VC funds for specific topics. And if you see over the last there are roughly 10 years in how many great startups they have invested, how many great things came out of it, how much innovation. That's also something that makes me proud. And maybe also the third thing is that now with i2x, I would definitely mention that I'm working on something very technical. I mean, very complex, which I feel in many areas is on the cutting edge globally, what you can do.
Sure, fascinating. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been really interesting and I've definitely very much enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you very much to you.